Hi, I'm John Hornick. Welcome to lesson 76 of Chef's Apprentice, Learning to Cook Like a Pro, one small plate at a time. This is the Ravioli master recipe. This master recipe uses freshly made pasta you made with pasta master recipe, lesson 55. The types of ravioli you can make with this technique are limited only by your imagination. Many of the purees in this course make great ravioli fillings. Just use a little less water or stock so they come out thicker, and chill them until they are firm before trying to make any raviolis. Generally, the fillings should be relatively dry so they don't soak through the pasta, and they should be chilled but not frozen and firm when you start making raviolis. The wetter and warmer the fillings, the harder they will be to work with. All of your practice in developing a delicate touch will come in handy now. Raviolis need to be made and handled gingerly so they don't tear or deform. The steps of this lesson may seem time-consuming, but with a little practice you'll be cranking out raviolis in no time. The challenge is to get good at it. To cook the raviolis, I often use a wide, medium-depth pot rather than a narrow, deep pot. This allows the raviolis to spread out more in the water. They cook more gently because they can't roll around in the boiling water of a deep pot. They're also easier to fish out when they're done. The more raviolis you cook at one time, the more water you'll need to finish them in 1 to 2 minutes. Some will float when they're done. After several begin to float, they're done, even if they're all not floating. Techniques today are making ravioli. So let's start cooking. Okay, let's talk about the mise en place that we need for lesson 76, the ravioli master recipe. We're going to need one batch of pasta freshly made from the pasta master recipe, which is lesson 55. I made this about an hour ago. I have it resting in the fridge in a damp cloth because I'm not going to make them for another couple hours. After you make the pasta, if you're going to use it within the hour, wrap it in a damp towel. You can leave it at room temperature. If you're not going to use it for several hours, then put it in the fridge, wrap it in a damp towel, and then bring it back out to room temperature before you start to make the ravioli. Okay, I wouldn't make this any more than a few hours ahead of time. All right, you also need to have some filling. Now, filling is not part of this lesson, okay? You can use anything you want for a filling. You could use one of the purees that we made in an earlier course and use less water or stock, as I said in the introduction. This is a filling that I made yesterday. It's just a mixture of goat cheese, asparagus that's been blanched, chopped prosciutto, chopped sun-dried tomatoes, and chopped scallions, okay? You could use mushroom filling, a cheese filling, also roasted butternut squash, a mixture of, maybe not all of those things, but a combination of those things. In addition to the filling, we'll need to have some all-purpose flour. And we'll probably only need about a quarter of a cup or so. I just have the whole container here. And then we'll also need some cornmeal to dust the pan that's going to receive the raviolis after they're finished. Okay, that's all of the ingredients that we need. We'll come back and I'll show you the equipment that you'll need for lesson 76. Okay, one last note about the mise en place before I talk about the equipment. You'll need to have about 1 to 1.5 cups of the filling if you're going to make the number of raviolis in the description. I'm only making for 2 people tonight, so I'm making fewer raviolis. I have a smaller amount of filling. You'll also need to have a sauce, okay? After you cook the raviolis, you want some kind of a sauce. You could use butter, brown butter, truffle butter. You could use tomato sauce. You could use garlic and olive oil. Or you could use any stock-based sauce. So again, that's not part of this lesson. This is only about making the raviolis themselves. All right, to make the raviolis, you're going to need to have a pasta machine. Now that's connected to the counter here, so I'm not going to show it to you. We've used it in the pasta master recipe. I used it to make the lesson 55 batch of fresh pasta today, but we're going to use it to roll out the sheets that we're going to then use to make the raviolis. You'll also need to have a sheet pan. We're going to scatter this with cornmeal, and then once the raviolis are finished, we're going to put them on this sheet pan. If you're going to use them right away, you can leave them out for a half an hour or so. If you're not going to use them right away, cover them, put them in the fridge. Also need to have a small pastry brush and then a small container of water. We'll need to have I'm going to use a pastry knife. Now, this is an OXO pastry knife. You can also just use a knife. Either a chef's knife or just a knife that you'd use at the dinner table. Then we're going to need to have a pasta cutter. This is a round pasta cutter, 2.5 inches. You could use a square one if you want. I think the round ones make a nicer pasta. And finally, we're going to need to have a spoon. They're going to be used to lift the pasta off the counter. Lift the raviolis off the counter after we have made them. Okay, that's all the equipment. We'll break, come back, and start cooking. Okay, the first thing on our prep list is to bring the pasta to room temperature. And here's the pasta that I made earlier. I'm going to dust this with flour before I start to roll it out. I'm just going to keep it wrapped in this damp towel until we're ready. The next thing we want to do is dust this sheet pan with the cornmeal, which will keep the raviolis from sticking to the pan and to each other. Alright, let's take our pasta and dust that with a little flour. I'm just going to take some flour, you know, just got a little bit on your fingers, and dust it all over that piece of pasta there so it doesn't stick. Okay? Now, we're just going to press it out a little bit so it's a little bit thinner. And then we're going to start running it through the pasta maker, starting on number 1 setting, which is the widest setting. The rollers are the farthest apart. If your pasta maker goes in the opposite direction, use the widest setting. Okay? Now we'll move to the 2nd setting. If it's still sticky, put a little bit more flour on it. All right, we'll roll it through on the number 2 setting. Then number 3. Now at this point, it's starting to get a bit long and unwieldy, so I take my my pastry knife and I just cut it roughly in half, and then I roll it through on the number 4 setting. Now, a word about pasta makers. This pasta maker goes up to number 9. Some pasta makers only go up to number 6 or 7. So if your pasta maker goes to number 9, you're probably going to roll this pasta out till it's about number 7. You don't want it to be too thin, and you're going to have to tell by looking at it. If it's like paper thin, then you can see it's probably going to tear. When you put the filling in and try to put one sheet of pasta over the other, you might tear the sheet, or you might tear it as you're trying to form it over the mounds of the filling. So on this machine, I'm going to go up to number 7. If my machine stopped at 6 or 7, I'd probably stop at 5 or 6. Okay, so now we're going to do number 5. Meanwhile, by the way, all of your filling should still be in the refrigerator, so it's cold and firm when you go to use it. Now we're going to go to setting number 6. Okay, now I've ended up with 2 pieces that are about the same length, and I'm going to stop here at 6. I can see that the pasta still has a good thickness to it. It's still pliable. It's less likely to tear with this thickness. All right, now I'm going to take my filling and start putting it down on the pasta sheets. Now, remember, your pasta cutter is about 2.5 inches wide, so you're going to want to make some filling that's going to fit nicely in there, no more than about 1 inch wide. Now you can either use a spoon or you can use your fingers to form it into the size that you want. You're going to need to do a little bit of experimenting at first till you get the size piece that you want. And we're going to place that down on the pasta sheet, not too close to either edge, right? You've got to have some space around it so that when you put the other sheet on top, you can seal that sheet down on top of the little mound of filling that you put on there. Now I'm putting them about, I'd say 3 inches apart. Now as you get more experience, you might be able to put them closer together. All right, as you get experience with how big you're putting the pieces down, how close together they are, putting the other sheet on top of them, you might be able to get them a little bit closer. But I'm going to do them about 2 to 3 inches apart for this video. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to put out the filling until we run out of it. Now when I put down the next line, I'm going to put them alternating because I have more space around them that way. If I put them right next to each other, I have less space. Okay, now I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 raviolis, okay? That's going to be more than enough for the 2 people that I'm cooking for tonight. These raviolis, you know, when you make them like this, they're pretty rich. You can serve 4 or 5 for a meal. You can serve 2 or 3 for a small plate. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to moisten this pasta dough. Now, there are other techniques out there so that you don't have to do this, but until you've gotten some experience, this is the technique that I recommend that you use. Now you don't want to soak the pasta, you want to just get it moist, and that's going to be kind of hard when you first start because your brush is going to pick up more liquid. It's going to pick up the liquid and it's going to put down more liquid when you first start. I go back and I pick up some of it where it's maybe wetter, and I try to spread that around, okay? Also, if you're working in the summer, or especially in a dry environment like I am, I'm at altitude, 7,000 feet, it's gonna dry out very quickly, okay? So you need to work pretty quickly. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to quickly go over the other sheet of pasta. Again, we don't want to soak it, we just want to moisten it. Now you might notice that I'm brushing over the entire piece of pasta, even though I may not be using all of it. The reason is because you don't know exactly, once you start putting this piece on top of the other piece, where the various parts of the pasta are going to fall, okay? So you want it all to be ready to stick. Now we're going to pick up this piece and we're carefully going to lay it on top of the mounds of filling, okay? And you can move it around for a little bit, okay? Then it'll start to stick. And then what you want to do is take your fingers and go around each one of the mounds and press the pasta top sheet down onto the bottom sheet very gently. And you want to try to prevent capturing air pockets in the pasta while you're doing this. Okay, now we're going to take our cutter and start cutting. We want to have our spoon standing by, and then we're going to cut them. Now, why do you not want to have air pockets? The reason is because if you have air pockets, the pasta is more likely to explode when you put it in the water. Okay, there's our first one. Okay, we're going to put it flat side down onto the pan with the cornmeal. Now, what you can do is one at a time, like that, or you can cut them all at the same time, and then, or do a few at a time and pick them up. I use the bottom of the spoon. It's less likely to ruin the nice pointed edges of the ravioli. Okay, and if you see any areas that where the bottom part and the top part don't seem to be sticking together real well, just gently squeeze them together. Okay. Also, if they've gotten kind of crunched a little bit as you are trying to pick them up or as you're cutting them, you can try to straighten them out a bit too as you're doing it. All right, so we're going to cut some more. Now you may have noticed that I did not flour the surface before I started doing this. I have found that you generally don't really need it if you're working on granite. But if you are just starting out, you're concerned about them sticking, just dust the surface with flour before you lay out the sheets. Camera cut off again. You can also try to press out any air bubbles that formed that you didn't get out earlier. All right, now you see we have all this pasta left over. Now I don't have any more filling, but if I had any more filling, I would take this pasta and I would put it back into a ball, press it together, and then I'd start running it back through the machine again, starting at setting number 1 up until the whatever setting where you stopped before. And I would just keep doing that basically until I run out of filling or I run out of pasta. Okay. All right, now here are our finished raviolis. Now, if you're going to cook them within the next half hour, maybe even an hour, you can leave them out. If it's a half an hour, you can leave them out uncovered. If it's gonna be as much of an hour, it's a good idea to cover them. If you're not gonna be cooking them within an hour, cover them and put them in the fridge. So we're not gonna be cooking them right now. So we're gonna cover them up and put them in the fridge until we're ready to cook. All right, now we're gonna heat our water and we're gonna put it on high to bring it to a boil. And this is what I meant by a wide, shallow pot, okay? I'm not sure if you can tell, but it's only about 2.5, 3 inches tall, and it's about 10, 11 inches wide. So rather than using a deep pot, we're using a wide, shallow pot. We'll bring that to a boil. I'm going to cover it so it comes to a boil faster. And there's a question of whether you use salted water or unsalted water. A lot of people use salted water. I often don't use salted water for pasta, but you can. This happens to be softened water because we have a water softener, so it actually does have a little bit of salt in it. So it's kind of like a halfway between salted and unsalted. All right, our water is boiling. Now we're going to cook our ravioli. So I want to put them all in there at, very quickly so that they're all getting roughly the same amount of cooking time. And they're going to take about 2 minutes. All right, so we're coming up on 2 minutes. Most of these are floating, okay? Now, we're going to take them out with a slotted spoon. Now, if you were serving them later, you could shock them in water to halt the cooking, and then you could warm them back up in the water before you plate up and serve. But I'm going to be plating up and serving immediately, so I'm just going to take them out and plate them up. So here we are. Here are our finished raviolis. You can see photos of the final dish with a sauce and with garnish at my Instagram, which is @ChefsApprentice, Cook Like a Pro. Next up, we're going to be reinforcing our ravioli making skills with roasted butternut squash and goat cheese or chev ravioli with sage, prosciutto, chestnuts, and brown butter. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, and thanks for watching.